important region. Not just flood or flood control, but storm-related pollution that we've certainly heard about today, negative impacts on our seafood, our coastal infrastructure, et cetera, really giving everyone the impression, hey, there's too much water. Well, Scott's going to talk about and introduce the equally important topic of water conservation. So, a little bit of a different take there. Our second speaker is Amy Dinn. She's managing attorney of Lone Star Legal Aid. They've been providing legal services to unreserved communities for over 70 years here in Texas. What they have found, though, is that those are the communities that were more impacted by Harvey, are more impacted by storm events. So she's now focusing a lot more on environmental issues and helping a lot of these people fight back. So a good story there. And then finally, Jaime Gonzalez. He is the Houston Urban Conservation Programs Manager at the Nature Conservancy. He's been involved in conservation efforts for many years. He recently joined the Nature Conservancy from Katy Prairie Conservancy. I think a lot of you certainly know his work. He's going to be introducing the concept of urban conservation. So it's not just saving the prairie, saving the wildlife, saving the land. There's us in the urban environment that need some focus as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Scott.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Maybe Rachel needs to wake us up again. I don't sing, so I'm not going to do it. So I'm crazy enough that I'm going to talk to you about. You say point toward back, right? Yeah. I got it. Whatever you just. So here I come. Hey, I'd like to talk to you about water conservation. When you got that going. So this has happened before. When I started working at the Galveston Bay Foundation, I started a couple days after Hurricane Ike. And my first job there was working on a grant relating to Senate Bill 3, where the state was trying to come up with standards for how much fresh water needs to flow to the bay. And, we had some flooding. We actually went to a little bit of a dry period after that. But there's been plenty of times where we, either Paula Gorsick or myself at our office, will try to talk about water conservation and we just had a flood, whether it's Tax Day or Memorial Day. And certainly those are terrible. And obviously many of us suffered, and we had friends or family that suffered. But we have a perception here in Southeast Texas that we've got plenty of water. But you don't have to think back too far to where you saw images like this. Dried out lakes, dried up fields. Back in 2011, we had a terrible drought. Is Mr. Nielsen Gammon still here? I don't think he is, so I'm glad, because I'll probably get this wrong, but I think the drought of 2011, it was so extreme, I think it eclipsed the drought of record of the 50s, which lasted a lot longer. But if you recall, the 2011 drought was awful, and we had all sorts of water restrictions. So, and you've already heard about the extremes. We know about the climate that is getting more extreme. We get these huge rain events. You saw his charts on the rain events, the magnitude of them. Well, it seems like we're also getting these more frequent droughts. So we're having to deal with that. And so even though we don't live in West Texas, we're not in the low precipitation area, over here in Southeast Texas, we do get these terrible droughts. And this was the drought monitor back in 2011. And I recall, and we have a farm up in East Texas, I just remember how bad it was and all the fire. But pretty much the whole state, if you recall, was just in severe drought. So that's what we're talking about here in Texas. And I think we have to think about it all the time, even coming out of a storm like Harvey. So what we're dealing with in Texas, in this area, is just increasing population, as you know. What you'll see, Region H, that refers to the water planning area. The state is divided into different areas that put forth a water plan to try to meet the water needs of humans. And Region H is a 15-county area in our area, and it goes up to about Walker County, a little bit further north. But the area has so many people, 6 million people in it, and our whole watershed, the Galveston Bay watershed, the area that drains to Galveston Bay from Dallas, Fort Worth, on the Trinity Fort Worth, that's 12 million people. That's about half the population of Texas. And it's just going to grow. You can see the chart with our population, it's going to grow. But actually our supply is going down a little bit. I believe that is attributed to losing some of the capacity in some of the reservoirs. But the bottom line is we've got a lot more people coming and we use a lot of water. And this shows the needs, this is Region H projections. You can see how the total, this is the acre feet of water that we need going up from 2020 to 2070. What doesn't change? You don't really see a change in manufacturing, water needed for manufacturing or irrigation, mining, livestock, but you do see a big change in the municipal, the amount of water we need for municipal use. So up in 2070, with all that population growth, if we keep using the water the same way we're using it, we could run into some big problems as far as freshwater inflow flowing down to the bay, and I'll tell you why that's important in a second. But this graph, this map here also shows just the increasing needs that we're going to have, and that just mimics the population growth in the area. You can see the growth heading down to Brazoria County. Fort Bend County's been growing like crazy. Y'all all know this. So this is what we're facing. Again, so you can just see that these demands that we're facing, they're driven by the climate, some of these changes, but it's exacerbated by this climate change. And so again, we're going to be having these normal growth needs with all the people, and then you think about when we come into periods of drought, and people are trying to figure out how that's going to be faced. And there's all sorts of ideas out there. You know, you can build more reservoirs, you can try to store water in aquifers underground, but then we got a big need for conservation. So I know in the upcoming legislative session we'll be dealing with legislators who want to do all sorts of things to move water from one part of the state to the other, and we got to keep the environment in mind. So again, we think that when we get a lot of rain, we get a lot of water that's being absorbed into the ground, and it's going to help recharge the aquifers and the springs are going to run, but that just doesn't happen in our urbanized setting. You heard from some of our prior speakers about the runoff that comes off a yard versus a properly or environmentally managed field. And so in this graphic just shows that when you get these highly urbanized areas, you get all that runoff just heading down our bayous, heading down our streams, and going to the bay and ultimately to the Gulf, rather than going down and being helped to recharge the aquifers if we have more natural prairies. So we're just not having that. So we're losing that water. And, you know, as a result of a lot of our water being used, we have a lot of subsidence. I've been talking to some folks in the table talks about where the land sank so much from all the groundwater withdrawal, and you can see what happened around the San Jacinto River and Houston Ship Channel, just to the east of downtown, and then also down around the Texas City area. So what we're doing because of that, for those that don't know, the Houston-Galveston area has a subsidence district. So we're switching from groundwater to surface water, and that's good for subsidence, but now we're having to build more reservoirs, and that has negative environmental impacts, even though it can also bring in some recreation. So we have to look at all of that. Now we've gone mainly to surface water, when in the past, you know, this area was known for all its artesian wells and lots of good springs. Well, that was tapped. Well, we're not doing that anymore. You're still seeing a lot of that happen out in Fort Bend County and other areas where they're not doing subsidence control. But so now we're having to really think about what's happening when we're building all these reservoirs and we have rivers that are being impacted. This was Paula's presentation. She put a lot of different little features in it. So basically, the why do we need to talk about water conservation? Because we need to protect the flow in our streams, and we need to protect the flow going into Galveston Bay. And this just shows in the future, we're going to have to start making up for a lot of our demands by conservation, so that's good. You know, I think we finally understood that we need to do a little bit more than just build more reservoirs. So now you are seeing that. And related to Galveston Bay's health, Galveston Bay depends on fresh water. Fresh water is a lifeblood of an estuary like Galveston Bay. And what can really be affected in an estuary are oysters. Oysters can handle only a certain salinity range for a long period of time. If it gets too salty, that's hard on the oysters. And then there's a lot of predators that love salty water, like oyster drills, which are snails. They drill into the shell and they eat the oyster. You also have boring sponges and boring clams that love all that salty water. So when it gets too salty, if we don't have enough water running down, then we can really affect the bay. And the problem is the Senate Bill 3 standards that were approved back in, was that 2013? I believe it was 2013 those were approved. Those did not adequately protect us. You can see the standards. Basically, the state is giving us a lot less than what you've seen historically. And the protections are really about 50% of what they need to be. And that's a whole nother presentation in itself. But we're worried what's going to happen if we don't start changing the way we use water. This basically shows what could happen when we have an artificial drought, when we take too much water out of the rivers for all our municipal needs and we don't let some of it go down the river. You can change the bay from your salinities, which are fresher, and all the oysters around in here, to where you get extremely high salinities. And we saw that in 2011, where you had salinities in some parts of the bay that were even higher than what you had in the Gulf, just because it's concentrated more like you'd see down in Laguna Madre. So the take-home message from all of this is, even though we have all these floods, we all need to do what we can on our own. And so we have a big water conservation education program where we're trying to get folks to use less water on their lawns, and there's all sorts of things you can do. But we've been focusing on the summer water usage because that's when the river flow is lower, and that's when everybody starts using all that water for the outdoor water, and we use about half the water in the summer for that. So we've already heard some gentlemen talk about some different vegetation. We can start, using less water by having less turf area. We can have more native plants, and there's a whole host of things you can do. And if you can make your soil healthier, you'll make that grass healthier, and it won't need as much water. So if you do the outdoor watering conservation, and then you try to save water inside, then you can actually help us even after Hurricane Harvey. So that's it.